You're pregnant?" The words shattered our family gathering like a crystal goblet thrown against marble, as my husband James turned ghost white while his mistress stood proudly announcing their little secret. Champagne glasses froze mid-air. Relatives gasped, and time itself seemed suspended beneath our ancestral chandelier. But I alone remained composed, savoring the exquisite irony that while Sophia might be carrying his child, I was carrying something infinitely more precious. To James. Absolute control over the Blackwood fortune he believed was his birthright. A $440 million trust fund that had financed his affair, his lifestyle, and his arrogance, all of which now hung by a thread I could snip at will. Let me take you back to how this delicious moment of reckoning began. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala was in full swing in our Newport Estates Grand Ballroom. Crystal glasses clinked, designer gowns swished across marble floors, and the chamber orchestra played a delicate Vivaldi piece that floated above the murmur of Boston's elite socializing. I stood by one of the tall windows, watching waves crash against the cliffs below our property while absently adjusting the emerald and diamond necklace that had belonged to James's grandmother. "Victoria!" My husband's voice came from behind me, startlingly close to my ear. "There you are. Mother's been looking everywhere for you." I turned to face James Blackwood, my husband of 11 years. His custom Tom Ford tuxedo fit his athletic frame perfectly, and his trademark smile, the one that had graced numerous financial magazines as Boston's most eligible bachelor before our marriage, was firmly in place. Yet something felt off. His blue eyes, usually shrewd and calculating, wouldn't quite meet mine. "I was just getting some air," I replied, taking a sip from my champagne flute. "The congressman's wife has been talking my ear off about her charity for displaced show dogs." James chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Well, Mother wants to introduce you to some new board members. She says it's important." I nodded, allowing him to guide me through the crowd with his hand pressed against the small of my back. James had been distracted lately, distant during dinner conversations, spending more nights at emergency meetings, and taking calls in hushed tones on the terrace when he thought I was asleep. After 11 years of marriage, I recognized the signs. Eleanor Blackwood, James's mother and the family matriarch at 78, commanded attention from her seat near the fireplace. Despite her age, she maintained the perfect posture and incisive gaze that had intimidated Boston society for 5 decades. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant updo, and the Blackwood sapphires adorned her neck, jewelry I knew would one day pass to me according to the trust Richard Blackwood had established before his death. "Victoria, darling," Eleanor extended her hand. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Abernathy and Ms. Chen. They've just joined the foundation board." I smiled warmly, shaking hands with the distinguished older gentleman and the young tech executive. "It's a pleasure. I've read about your work in sustainable housing developments in the Cambridge Herald, Dr. Abernathy." "The pleasure is mine," Dr. Abernathy replied. "Your reputation precedes you as well. I understand Blackwood Restoration Group has saved more historic buildings under your direction than in its entire 50-year history before you took over." I felt James tense beside me. Blackwood Restoration Group has been my passion project for the past 8 years. What had started as a minor division within Blackwood Enterprises had flourished under my guidance into an award-winning historic preservation firm with projects across New England. James had initially supported my work, or at least pretended to, but lately his enthusiasm had cooled considerably. "Victoria has quite the eye for restoring the past," Eleanor commented with a knowing look. "Richard always said she could see the original beauty beneath years of neglect. Richard Blackwood, James's father, had been my greatest champion within the family. In the final years before his cancer diagnosis, we'd spent countless hours discussing architecture, preservation, and his vision for the family legacy. Those conversations had shaped my career path, and though James didn't know it, had profoundly altered the structure of the Blackwood Family Trust. As the conversation continued, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. A striking woman in a red dress had arrived, fashionably late and drawing more attention than appropriate for someone who wasn't a Blackwood. I recognized her immediately. Sophia Kane, the new marketing director James had hired for Blackwood Enterprises 6 months ago. "James," I murmured, nodding toward the entrance. "Your new marketing director has arrived." He followed my gaze, and I watched his expression shift almost imperceptibly. A tightening around the eyes, a slight parting of the lips. He covered it quickly, but not before I caught it. "Excuse me," he said to our small group. "I should greet her. She doesn't know many people yet." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly as she watched her son cross the room with unusual haste. "Victoria?" she said after a moment. "I don't believe I've met that young woman. Did James mention she was attending tonight?" "No," I replied, keeping my voice light. "He didn't." Eleanor gave me a long look before changing the subject, but I could see the wheels turning behind her shrewd eyes. Eleanor Blackwood missed nothing, especially not when it came to potential threats to her family's reputation. Later that evening, as the gala was winding down, I found myself alone in Richard's old study, now James's office, searching for a particular book on New England architecture that I wanted to show Dr. Abernathy. The room still held Richard's essence, leather-bound books lining mahogany shelves, the faint scent of his preferred tobacco, and the magnificent desk where he'd conducted family business for 40 years. I heard voices in the hallway, James and a woman. They were speaking in hushed tones, but the old house carried sound in strange ways. "You shouldn't have come tonight, Sophia," James was saying, his voice urgent. "You said this gala was important to you," she replied. "I wanted to support you." "My wife is here. My mother." "I know your wife is here, James. I'm not an idiot. But you said things were complicated between you two." I froze, my hand still on the bookshelf. So my suspicions had been correct. "They are, but—" James sighed. "This isn't the place to discuss it. Come to my office tomorrow, and we'll figure things out." "Figure what out, exactly?" Sophia's voice had an edge now. "How long are you going? To keep stringing me along while you work up the courage to leave your wife? Or are you planning to have us both indefinitely?" There was a long pause, and I strained to hear James's response. "It's not that simple," he finally said. "There are financial considerations. The trust— Look, I need time." I almost laughed out loud. Financial considerations indeed. If James only knew. The pair moved away down the hall, their voices fading. I remained motionless for a moment, processing what I'd heard. So James was having an affair with his marketing director. How cliché. And he was hesitant to leave me because of financial considerations. What he meant, of course, was that he was afraid of losing access to the Blackwood fortune. What he didn't know, what Richard had ensured he wouldn't know until necessary, was that the Blackwood Trust had been restructured significantly before Richard's death. While James believed he had full control of the family fortune as Richard's only son, the reality was quite different. I had been appointed as the controlling trustee, with final authority over all major financial decisions. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Richard had recognized something in his son that worried him. A recklessness, an entitlement, a willingness to risk the family legacy for short-term gains. During those final months of his illness, Richard had made the difficult decision to place the trust in my hands instead, until James demonstrates the judgment needed to steward the Blackwood legacy properly, as the documents stated. Only Eleanor, Richard's longtime attorney Walter Pierce, and I knew the full details of the arrangement. James had been told only that the trust had been updated with modern protections, vague legal language that he hadn't bothered to investigate, assuming his position as heir was unassailable. I found the architecture book I'd been looking for and closed the study door behind me, rejoining the party with a practiced smile. As I discussed historic preservation techniques with Dr. Abernathy, I watched James and Sophia across the room, carefully maintaining their distance yet stealing glances when they thought no one was looking. 3 days later, James announced over breakfast that he was hosting a small family gathering at our home the following weekend. "Any particular occasion?" I asked, stirring my tea. We were seated in our sun-drenched morning room, the Boston Globe spread between us as was our Sunday routine. "No occasion," he replied too quickly, eyes fixed on the financial section. "Just thought it would be nice to have everyone together. It's been a while." I studied him over the rim of my teacup. James had never spontaneously organized a family gathering in the 11 years we'd been married. That had always been Eleanor's domain, or mine. "Who's everyone, exactly?" He shrugged, attempting nonchalance. "Mother, of course. Uncle Philip. And Aunt Margaret. Cousin David and his wife. I thought we might invite Walter as well, he's practically family." Walter Pierce, the family attorney. Interesting. I wondered if James was finally starting to look into the trust details. If so, he was in for quite a surprise. "Sounds lovely," I said, returning to my own section of the newspaper. "Should I invite Sophia Kane as well? Your new marketing director seems very eager to be involved in Blackwood affairs." James's head snapped up, his expression a mixture of shock and alarm. "Why would you invite her to a family gathering?" I met his gaze evenly. "Just a thought. You seem to think highly of her work." His face settled into careful neutrality. "She's a valuable employee, but this is family business." "Of course," I replied smoothly. "Shall I handle the menu, or would—" "You prefer to?" Relief washed over his features at the change of subject. "You always do a better job with that sort of thing." The week passed with James growing increasingly anxious as the gathering approached. He spent long hours at the office, returning home late with vague explanations about quarterly projections and market analysis. I didn't press him, instead focusing on preparations for our Sunday luncheon while quietly making some arrangements of my own. On Friday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at my office in the Blackwood Restoration Group headquarters, a converted textile mill in Cambridge that now housed our team of preservation architects and historians. "Mrs. Blackwood?" My assistant knocked on my open door. "There's Eleanor Blackwood here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but—" "Send her in, Anna," I said, quickly clearing some papers from my desk. Eleanor rarely left her Beacon Hill home these days, and she had never once visited my office. Eleanor entered with her characteristic dignity, leaning slightly on a silver-handled cane, but otherwise showing few signs of her 78 years. My assistant closed the door behind her. "Mother Blackwood," I greeted her, coming around the desk. "What a pleasant surprise. May I offer you tea?" "No need for formalities, Victoria," she said, lowering herself into one of my visitor chairs. "And please, after 11 years, you might consider simply calling me Eleanor." I smiled and took the seat beside her rather than returning behind my desk. "What brings you to Cambridge, Eleanor?" She studied me with those penetrating blue eyes. So, like James's, yet sharper somehow. "I spoke with Walter Pierce yesterday." My heart rate increased slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. "Oh? Is everything all right with the foundation?" "The foundation is fine," she waved dismissively. "He mentioned that James has been making inquiries about the trust, specifically about access to the principal for a significant investment opportunity." So that was it. James needed money, likely, to set up his new life with Sophia. "I see," I replied carefully. "Did Walter explain the terms?" "He explained that as the controlling trustee, you would need to approve any such request." Eleanor's gaze was unwavering. He also mentioned that my son seemed quite surprised by this information. I couldn't help a small smile. I imagine he was. Victoria, Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Richard made his choices for good reason. I've respected those choices and your position as trustee. But I need to know, what are your intentions? Regarding my son? It was a loaded question, coming from a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting the Blackwood legacy. My intentions align with Richard's, I answered truthfully. To protect the Blackwood legacy, including from James's more impulsive decisions, when necessary. And his current situation? Are you aware of it? So Eleanor knew about the affair. 2. I shouldn't have been surprised. I am, I confirmed. And this gathering on Sunday? What's that about? I shook my head. I'm not entirely sure, but James has invited Walter, which suggests it relates to financial matters. Eleanor was silent for a moment, absently turning her wedding ring, a substantial diamond that had been in the Blackwood family for generations. Richard always said you had excellent judgment, she finally remarked. Better than James's, though. It pained him to admit it. That's why he restructured the trust the way he did. Richard wanted to protect James from himself, I said quietly. And to protect the legacy that 5 generations of Blackwoods have built. And what about you, Victoria? What do you want? It was a question I'd been asking myself lately. What did I want? Revenge for James's betrayal? Security for my own future? Or something else entirely? I want what's best for the Blackwood legacy, I answered, surprising myself with how true it felt. After 11 years, the family's welfare had become inextricably linked with my own identity and purpose. Eleanor nodded slowly. As do I. She rose from her chair with dignity. I'll see you on Sunday then. You don't think I should cancel the gathering? Absolutely not, Eleanor said, with a hint of the steel that had made her such a formidable Boston society matron. I'm quite curious to see what my son has planned, and, she added with a small, shrewd smile, how you intend to respond. After she left, I sat in silence for several minutes, contemplating the upcoming gathering. Whatever James had planned, I would need to be prepared. Little did I know that Sunday would bring a revelation that would shock even me, a woman who prided herself on always being one step ahead. Sunday morning arrived with a perfect New England autumn crispness. Golden light filtered through the maple trees surrounding our Beacon Hill home, casting dappled shadows across the antique Persian rugs in our dining room. I'd spent the previous day overseeing preparations, selecting the season's first Macintosh, apples for the centerpiece, instructing our housekeeper, Mrs. Fleming, on the table settings, and finalizing a menu that featured James's favorite rosemary lamb. As I arranged fresh-cut dahlias from our garden, I mentally reviewed what I knew. James had invited family members and Walter Pierce to our home. He'd been making inquiries about accessing the trust principal. He was having an affair with Sophia Kane, his marketing director. What I didn't know was how these pieces fit together, though I had my suspicions. The doorbell rang precisely at noon. Eleanor arrived first, as was her custom, early enough to assess the situation before others arrived. Victoria, she greeted me with a kiss on each cheek. The house looks lovely. Thank you, Eleanor. James is in his study making calls. May. I get you something to drink? A small sherry, perhaps. She followed me to the sitting room, her cane tapping softly against the hardwood floors. Has anything else developed since our conversation? I poured her drink from the crystal decanter that had been a wedding gift from her. Nothing concrete. James has been distracted, working late. He received a call last night that seemed to upset him, but he wouldn't discuss it. Eleanor accepted the glass. And Walter? Has he arrived yet? Not yet. James asked him to bring some documents, though he wouldn't specify what kind. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly. Interesting. Before we could continue, the doorbell rang again. Within the next 30 minutes, the remaining guests arrived. Philip and Margaret Blackwood, James's uncle and aunt, followed by cousin David and his wife Serena, and finally Walter Pierce, carrying his signature leather portfolio. James emerged from his study looking immaculate in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, but I noted the tension in his shoulders and the tightness around his eyes. He'd barely slept the night before, getting up several times to make hushed phone calls from his study. "Welcome, everyone," he greeted our guests with practiced charm. "It's wonderful to have the family together." Lunch proceeded with the usual Blackwood formality, polite conversation about philanthropic endeavors, David's children's academic achievements, and the Foundation's recent grant recipients. I noticed James drinking more heavily than usual, refilling his wine glass with increasing frequency. "So, James," Philip finally asked as Mrs. Fleming cleared the main course, "you mentioned having something to discuss with the family. Business matters, I presume?" James set down his wine glass carefully. "Yes, actually. Perhaps we should move to the library for coffee and dessert? More comfortable for a discussion." As everyone migrated to the library, I caught Walter Pierce's eye. The attorney gave me an almost imperceptible nod, confirming my suspicion that whatever James had planned, Walter was aware of it. The Blackwood Library was Richard's favorite room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather club chairs, and a massive marble fireplace. Family portraits dating back to the 1800s watched over us from gilded frames, generations of Blackwoods who had built and protected the fortune James now sought to access. Once everyone was settled with coffee, James cleared his throat. "I've asked you here today because I'm considering a significant new direction for Blackwood Enterprises," he began. "An investment opportunity has presented itself, one with exceptional potential returns." "What sort of investment?" Philip asked, leaning forward with interest. "A development project in Singapore. Luxury residences combined with high-end retail. The projections are extremely favorable. Walter has reviewed them." James nodded toward the attorney, who maintained a carefully neutral expression. "Sounds intriguing," David commented. "Though rather outside our traditional investment portfolio, isn't it? The Blackwood investments have typically focused on New England and the eastern seaboard." James waved his hand dismissively. "That's precisely the problem. We've been too conservative, too regional in our approach. The global market offers opportunities we've been missing." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Your father believed in investing in communities we understood intimately. It served the family well for generations." "Times change, Mother," James replied with barely concealed impatience. "This Singapore project could yield returns at nearly 3 times our current portfolio average." "And the capital requirements?" I asked, my first contribution to the discussion. James glanced at me, a flicker of wariness in his eyes. "Substantial, but manageable. That's partly why I've gathered everyone here today." He turned to Walter. "Perhaps you could explain the necessary arrangements?" Walter cleared his throat, opening his portfolio. "James has asked me to prepare documents that would enable access to approximately $30 million from the Blackwood Trust principal." A murmur went around the room. The trust had always been managed conservatively, with family members living comfortably on the considerable interest and dividends while preserving the principal. "$30 million?" Philip repeated, shocked. "That's highly unusual, James. The trust has strict limitations on accessing principal, which is why I need the family's support," James said smoothly. "Walter has advised me that with united family approval, we can petition for a special dispensation from the trust restrictions." I caught Walter's eye again, and this time his expression conveyed a clear message. "This isn't the full story. What Walter hasn't mentioned," I said calmly, "is that any such petition would require approval from the controlling trustee, regardless of other family members' support." James's head snapped toward me, surprise evident on his face. "The controlling trustee? You mean the board of trustees collectively?" Walter shifted uncomfortably. Actually, James, as I tried to explain when you came to my office, your father's final revision to the trust established a controlling trustee with final authority over major financial decisions, particularly those involving principal. And who exactly is this controlling trustee? James demanded, his composure beginning to crack. Walter looked at me, then back at James. Your wife, Victoria. The room fell silent. James stared at me, disbelief and betrayal washing over his features as he processed this information. That's impossible, he finally said. I'm the Blackwood heir. My father would never— Your father made that decision during his final months. Eleanor interjected firmly. He had his reasons, James. You knew? James turned to his mother, incredulous. All this time? I did, Eleanor confirmed. As did Walter and Victoria, of course. James stood abruptly, pacing to the fireplace. So what you're telling me is that I need my wife's permission to access my own family's money? Money that rightfully belongs to me as Richard Blackwood's son? The money belongs to the trust, Walter clarified, which was established for the benefit of the Blackwood family across generations, not for any individual member's sole discretion. James turned to me, his eyes cold. And you've been keeping this from me for— how long? Since before my father died? Since before we were married? Your father appointed me as trustee 3 months before he died, I answered steadily. After. We'd been married for 8 years. He was concerned about certain investment decisions you'd been making. The Westbrook Casino project, Eleanor added. The yacht racing team. The attempted purchase of that vineyard in France that turned out to be worthless. James's face flushed with anger. So, my father appointed my wife to control me? To treat me like a child incapable of managing his own inheritance? To protect the legacy that 5 generations built, I corrected. Your father believed I shared his values about how the Blackwood fortune should be preserved and used. How convenient for you, James said bitterly. Did you know about this arrangement before you married me, Victoria? Was that the plan all along? The accusation stung, though I'd expected it. I met your father 2 years after we were married. James, you know that? Do I? He laughed harshly. Apparently, I don't know anything about my own family arrangements. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. James checked his watch, an expression of alarm briefly crossing his face. Are we expecting someone else? Eleanor asked, looking from James to me. No, I said slowly, rising from my seat. I didn't invite anyone else. James moved quickly toward the hallway. I'll see who it is. But Mrs. Fleming had already answered. The door. I heard a woman's voice, then James speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Before he could finish whatever he was saying, the visitor brushed past him into the library. Sophia Kane stood in the doorway, looking elegant in a camel coat and burgundy dress. I'm so sorry I'm late, she said, glancing around the room with a brilliant smile. Traffic from Cambridge was terrible. The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor straightened in her chair, her expression hardening as she recognized the woman from the gala. Philip and Margaret exchanged glances. Walter looked like he wanted to disappear into the leather upholstery. Ms. Kane? I said finally, stepping forward. What a surprise! I wasn't aware James had invited you to our family gathering. Sophia's confidence faltered slightly as she looked from me to James, who had followed her into the room with an expression of barely concealed panic. James invited me last week, she said, her smile becoming fixed. He said it was important that I be here for the announcement. What announcement would that be? Eleanor asked icily. Sophia looked to James again, clearly expecting him to take the lead. When he remained silent, her expression hardened with determination. Our announcement, she said, placing a protective hand on her stomach. James and I are having a baby. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. I felt a curious detachment, as though watching the scene from above rather than participating in it. So this was why James needed $30 million to start a new life with Sophia and their child. "Is this true, James?" Eleanor demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. James ran a hand through his hair, his usual polish completely abandoned. "This isn't how I planned to discuss it," he muttered, shooting an angry glance at Sophia. "Discuss what exactly?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your affair with your marketing director, or your plan to use Blackwood Trust money to finance your new life with her?" Sophia's triumphant expression faltered. "What is she talking about, James? You said you were going to tell them about us today, that you were accessing your inheritance." "It's complicated, Sophia," James said tightly. "Perhaps I can simplify things," I suggested, turning to our shocked family members. "It appears James invited Ms. Kane here to announce their relationship and pregnancy, presumably after securing $30 million from the trust to support them. That's not," James began, but I continued. "What he didn't realize until a few minutes ago is that he doesn't have authority to access that money without my approval as the controlling trustee." Sophia looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "What does that mean?" "You told me the Singapore project was just a formality, that the money was yours by right. James has significantly misrepresented his financial situation to you, Ms. Kane," Eleanor said coldly. "The Blackwood fortune is held in a trust that he does not control." Sophia turned to James, her expression hardening. "You told me you were worth over $400 million. You said once the trust released the funds, I am worth that much," James insisted desperately. "The money is mine. It's just tied up in legal technicalities." "Technicalities?" I repeated. "Is that what you call your father's explicit wishes? The legal structure he created specifically to prevent impulsive, self-serving decisions exactly like this one?" The room fell silent again as everyone absorbed the full magnitude of the situation. Philip shook his head in disgust. David stared at his cousin with undisguised shock. Walter Pierce busied himself collecting his documents, clearly eager to escape this family drama. "I think," Eleanor said finally, rising with dignity, "that this gathering has served its purpose, though not the one intended. Philip, Margaret, perhaps you could give me a ride home?" "Of course, Eleanor," Philip replied, helping his wife to her feet. "David, Serena, you're welcome to join us." As the family began their hasty exodus, Sophia remained frozen in place, the reality of her situation finally dawning on her. "So what happens now?" she asked, her hand still protectively on her stomach. "That's for James to explain," I replied, though I suggest he start with the truth this time. After the others had gone, with promises from Walter to call me the next day, only the four of us remained in the library. James, Sophia, Eleanor, who had insisted on staying despite Philip's offer, and me. "You've made quite a mess, haven't you, James?" Eleanor observed, settling back into her chair. James ignored her, turning to me with calculation replacing his earlier shock. "You're enjoying this, aren't you, Victoria? Watching me squirm, exerting your control." "Not particularly," I answered truthfully. "I took no pleasure in keeping Richard's arrangement from you. I had hoped you would mature enough that it would never become an issue." "Mature?" James laughed bitterly. "You mean become as boringly conservative as my father? As content with mediocrity? Your father built a business empire from a single hardware store," Eleanor reminded him sharply. "There was nothing mediocre about Richard Blackwood." "Is someone going to explain what's happening?" Sophia demanded, her earlier confidence now completely evaporated. "James, you promised me—" "Be quiet, Sophia," James snapped. "Let me think." I studied the woman who had been sleeping with my husband, young, ambitious, and now carrying his child. Despite everything, I found I didn't hate her. In many ways, she was as much James's victim as I was. "Ms. Kane," I said gently, "I think you should know that James has been lying to you about more than just his control of the Blackwood fortune. Has he told you he plans to divorce me?" Sophia nodded, her eyes filling with tears of frustration. "He said it was just a matter of timing, that once the Singapore deal was finalized." "I see. And did he mention that the Blackwood Trust has strict morality clauses? That in the event of a divorce due to his infidelity, his access to trust funds would be severely restricted?" Sophia turned to James, her expression hardening. "Is that true?" James's silence was enough. "So you can't access this money without her permission," Sophia said slowly. "And if you divorce her because of me, you lose access to most of it permanently." "It's more complicated than that," James insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it's quite simple," Eleanor interjected. "My son has placed himself in an impossible position by making promises he cannot keep, based on access to money he does not control." I watched James's face as the full reality of his situation crashed down on him. For years, he had operated under the assumption that the Blackwood fortune was his birthright, there for the taking whenever he chose. The revelation that it had been placed beyond his reach, and specifically in my hands, was a blow to his very identity. "This can be resolved," he said finally, with forced calm. "Victoria and I need to discuss our options privately." "What options?" Sophia demanded, her voice rising. "I'm pregnant with your child, James. You promised me we would be together, that you would leave your marriage." "And I meant it," James insisted, shooting me a calculated look. "But these new complications require some adjustment to our timeline." I understood his game immediately. He would try to placate Sophia while attempting to negotiate with me for access to the funds, perhaps offering a quiet divorce settlement in exchange for my approval of his trust withdrawal. "Ms. Kane," I said, rising from my seat, "I think you should be aware that whatever James has promised you, he is not currently in a position to fulfill those promises financially." "Victoria," James began warningly. "Furthermore," I continued, "if you are indeed carrying his child, I suggest you consult an attorney of your own, not a Blackwood family attorney, to protect your interests and those of your child." Sophia looked between us, suddenly seeing her situation with new clarity. "You've been playing me," she said to James, her voice hollow. "All those promises about our future, about the life we'd build together." "I meant every word," James insisted, reaching for her hand. "This is just a temporary setback." Sophia pulled away from him. "A temporary setback? You've built our entire relationship on lies. You told me you controlled your family's fortune, that we'd start our life together with the Singapore project." "And we still can," James urged. "I just need to work out some details with Victoria." The way he said my name, as though I were merely an obstacle to be overcome, a problem to be solved, crystallized something for me. This man, whom I had loved and supported for 11 years, saw me only as a means to an end. "There are no details to work out, James," I said quietly. "The trust was structured as it was for precisely this reason, to prevent you from making impulsive decisions that would damage the Blackwood legacy." "This is my legacy!" James exploded, his composure finally shattering completely. "Mine by birth, not yours to control." "Yet here we are," Eleanor observed dryly. Sophia backed toward the door, her hand still on her stomach. "I need to go. I need to think." "Sophia, wait." James started after her, but she held up her hand. "Don't follow me, James. I've heard enough for today." After she left, the three of us remained in the library, the ticking of the grandfather clock the only sound breaking, the heavy silence. "Well," Eleanor finally said, "this has been quite the family gathering." James turned to me, his expression calculating once more. We need to talk, Victoria. Privately. I nodded slowly. Yes, I think we do. What James didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment for years, ever since Richard had first shown me the revised trust documents and explained his fears about his son's judgment. Whatever James was planning to propose, I was already 3 steps ahead. The real game was just beginning. Eleanor left reluctantly, only after I assured her several times that I was perfectly capable of handling James alone. Call me immediately. If you need me, she'd insisted, pressing my hand firmly before departing. Remember what Richard always said? Never negotiate from a position of emotion, I finished for her, a phrase I'd heard countless times during my conversations with James's father. Now, as the front door closed behind Eleanor, a tense silence filled our home. James poured himself a generous scotch from the library's bar cart without offering me one. A small but deliberate slight. 11 years of marriage, he finally said, swirling the amber liquid. 11 years, and I never knew my own wife was secretly controlling my inheritance. Not secretly, I corrected, taking a seat in Richard's old leather chair. Richard's instructions were clear. The details were always available to you in the trust documents. You simply never bothered to read them, James scoffed. Legal documents hundreds of pages long, filled with incomprehensible legalese. Walter would have explained everything if you'd asked. But you assumed, as you always have, that the Blackwood fortune was yours by birthright, no questions asked. He took a long sip of scotch. And you didn't think this arrangement was something worth mentioning to your husband? Richard asked me not to bring it up unless necessary. He hoped you would mature, that your business decisions would improve, to the point where the additional oversight wouldn't be needed. I met his gaze steadily. Clearly that hasn't happened. James set down his glass hard enough that scotch sloshed over the rim. So what happens now, Victoria? You hold all the cards, apparently. Are you going to deny me access to my own family's money out of spite? Punishment for my affair? This isn't about your affair, James. It's about the $30 million you're trying to extract from the trust for a highly speculative foreign investment, conveniently timed with your plans to start a new life with your pregnant mistress. The Singapore project is legitimate, he insisted. The returns could be substantial. Could be, I emphasized. Or it could be like the Dubai hotel venture that lost $8 million, or the Brazilian mining operation that turned out to be a complete fraud. Your father watched you make these mistakes with your personal funds. He created this arrangement to ensure you couldn't do the same with the family fortune. James paced to the window, staring out at the garden where autumn leaves were beginning to fall. I need that money, Victoria. For Sophia and the baby, I stated flatly, not for Singapore real estate. He turned back to me, calculating replacing anger in his expression. I'm prepared to be generous in our divorce settlement. The house in Newport, the apartment in New York, a substantial monthly allowance, in exchange for my approval of your $30 million withdrawal from the trust, I finished for him. It's a reasonable arrangement, he said with the practiced charm that had once captivated me. You get financial security and freedom. I get a fresh start. Everyone wins. I almost admired his audacity, trying to bribe me with assets that were already partially mine as his wife, while asking me to release funds that were 30 times more valuable. The problem with your proposal, I replied evenly, is that it assumes I'm motivated primarily by money or vengeance. I'm not. Then what do you want? Frustration edged his voice. The same thing your father wanted, to protect the Blackwood legacy. The family business that employs hundreds of people. The foundation that funds hospitals and scholarship programs. The investments that have sustained 5 generations and could sustain 5 more if managed properly. Noble sentiments, James said dismissively. But we both know there's more than enough in the trust to spare $30 million without endangering any of that. Perhaps, I conceded. But that's not the only consideration. I rose and crossed to the built-in bookshelves, removing a leather-bound volume, one of Richard's journals that he'd asked me to keep in the final weeks of his life. I found the page I was looking for and handed it to James. "What's this?" he asked suspiciously. "Something your father wrote 3 months before he died. Read it." James glanced down at his father's distinctive handwriting. "I've come to the painful conclusion that James lacks the fundamental judgment needed to steward the Blackwood fortune. His investment decisions consistently prioritize flash over substance, quick returns over sustainable growth. Most concerning is his willingness to misrepresent facts when it serves his purposes. To me, to the board, even to himself. I cannot in good conscience leave him unrestricted control over resources that affect so many lives beyond his own." James's face flushed as he read, then paled. He closed the journal with deliberate care, setting it on the desk. "You think showing me my father's disappointment in me somehow strengthens your position?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I'm showing you why Richard made the choice he did," I replied. "And why I can't simply approve your request is because you've offered me a bribe disguised as a divorce settlement." James studied me with new intensity. "You've changed, Victoria. When did you become so calculating?" "Perhaps around the same time you were calculating how to leverage your family's fortune to start a new life with your pregnant mistress." A flash of genuine emotion, something like shame, crossed his face before the mask of confident entitlement returned. "Sophia's pregnancy wasn't planned, yet remarkably convenient for her," I observed. "A Blackwood heir ensures her connection to the family fortune, whether or not you remain together." "You don't know her," James snapped defensively. "She's not like that." "Perhaps not," I allowed. "But she certainly believed you when you misrepresented your financial situation. That speaks to either remarkable naivety or willful self-deception." James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Whatever you think of Sophia, there's an innocent child involved now." "Yes," I agreed. "A child who deserves security. Which is why I've already instructed Walter to establish a trust for your child's education and healthcare needs." His head snapped up in surprise. "You what?" "I spoke with Walter yesterday. I had a feeling something like this might be developing, given your inquiries about the trust principle. The child's trust will be funded with a reasonable amount from the Family Foundation's discretionary account, completely separate from any decisions about your $30 million request." For once, James seemed genuinely speechless. "Your child will be a Blackwood," I continued calmly. "Regardless of my feelings about how this situation developed, I won't allow your child to suffer for your actions." James sank into a chair, staring at me as though seeing me for the first time. "You anticipated all of this. How?" "Not all of it," I admitted. "I expected you might be planning to leave me for Sophia, given your recent behavior. I suspected you might be seeking access to trust funds to finance that transition. The pregnancy was the only surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have been." "And you've already planned a counter-strategy," he said slowly. "The child's trust, separate from any negotiations about the $30 million. I nodded. "It seemed the right thing to do." James leaned forward, his expression intent. "What if I proposed a different approach? Not Singapore. Something Richard would have approved of. Local development, sustainable, community-focused." "You mean something that might actually convince me to release trust funds?" I smiled faintly. "Is that so impossible? We built successful projects together before. The Harborview redevelopment, the tech incubator in Somerville. Those were Richard's projects," I reminded him. "You participated because he insisted, not because you believed in them." "I've learned since then," James argued. "Maybe this situation, all of it, is a wake-up call, a chance to refocus." I studied him carefully, trying to determine if this was genuine reflection or simply another manipulation tactic. With James, it was often difficult to tell the difference. "You want me to believe that in the space of an hour, You've had a complete change of heart? That you're suddenly committed to the kind of responsible investment your father advocated? No, he admitted with surprising candor. But I am reconsidering my options. Reality has a way of clarifying one's thinking. The house phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Mrs. Fleming appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Blackwood, it's Miss Kane calling for Mr. Blackwood. She sounds quite upset. James and I exchanged glances. I'll take it in my study, he said, rising. Quickly. After he left, I remained in the library, considering our conversation. James was adapting his strategy, just as I'd expected. The direct approach having failed, he was now attempting to appeal to my business sense, to leverage our past collaborations. It was a more sophisticated play than I'd anticipated, which made me wary. 20 minutes later, he returned looking grim. Is Sophia all right? I asked, genuinely concerned. She's been calling her brother, James said tightly. A business reporter for the Boston Globe, I tensed. I see. She threatened to give him the whole story. The Blackwood heir's secret arrangement, with his wife controlling the family fortune, the pregnancy, all of it. That would be unfortunate, I said carefully. For everyone involved, including Sophia and her child. That's what I told her, James agreed. I managed to convince her to hold off for now, but she's angry, Victoria. She feels deceived. Because she was deceived, I pointed out. By you. He ignored this. If this becomes public, the damage to the Blackwood name would be substantial. The business community's confidence in the company could be affected. Stock prices would suffer. Are you suggesting I should approve your $30 million request to prevent a scandal? I asked, incredulous. I'm suggesting we find a mutually beneficial solution, James countered. One that addresses everyone's concerns. I rose and walked to the window, watching the lengthening shadows in the garden. James was backing me into a corner, using Sophia's threatened exposé as leverage. It was a predictable move, yet effective. A public scandal would indeed damage the Blackwood. Business interests, something Richard had always been careful to avoid. What exactly do you propose? I asked finally. James leaned forward eagerly. A compromise. I don't pursue the Singapore project. Instead, I develop a detailed plan for a locally focused investment, something in line with Richard's values. You approve a more modest disbursement from the trust, say $15 million instead of 30. Enough to establish Sophia and the baby comfortably while funding a legitimate business venture. And our marriage? I turned to face him. We announce an amicable separation, he said smoothly. No scandalous divorce, no public accusations. We maintain appearances for an appropriate period, then quietly file papers citing irreconcilable differences. It was all so calculated, so cold. The man I had married, or thought I had married, was presenting our 11 years together as just another business transaction to be negotiated and settled. And Sophia would agree to this arrangement? No press involvement, no scandal? She will if it means security for her and the baby, James said confidently. Sophia is ambitious, not stupid. She understands the value of the Blackwood name remaining untarnished. I returned to my seat, considering this proposal. It wasn't without merit from a purely practical perspective. A controlled separation would indeed protect the family business interests better than a scandalous divorce. A smaller trust disbursement would be less damaging than $30 million directed to a risky foreign venture, but something about the entire proposition felt wrong, as though I were being maneuvered into a corner despite holding the stronger position. I'll need time to consider this, I said finally, and I'll want any agreement in writing, reviewed by independent counsel, not Walter, who has divided loyalties. James nodded, clearly believing he'd gained the upper hand. Of course. Take a day or two. But, Victoria, he added, his tone hardening slightly. Don't take too long. Sophia is volatile right now. Emotional. I can't guarantee she'll maintain. discretion indefinitely. The implied threat hung in the air between us. I merely nodded, unwilling to reveal my thoughts. After James left the library, presumably to update Sophia on their new strategy, I remained seated in Richard's chair, my mind working through scenarios and countermoves. James believed he had leveraged Sophia's threat into a workable compromise. What he didn't realize was that his new proposal had revealed weaknesses I could exploit. I picked up my phone and dialed Eleanor. "It's Victoria," I said when she answered. "We need to talk." "Not here. James might overhear. Can you meet me at the foundation office in an hour?" "Of course," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Has something happened?" "James is adapting his strategy," I explained, "and I need to stay 3 steps ahead." The Blackwood Foundation occupied the top floor of a historic building in downtown Boston, its windows overlooking the harbor where Blackwood ships had once unloaded cargo from around the world. On Sundays, the offices were deserted, providing the perfect place for a private conversation. Eleanor was waiting when I arrived, seated in the conference room with a pot of tea already prepared. At 78, she still maintained a commanding presence. Straight silver hair perfectly coiffed, eyes sharp with intelligence honed through decades of navigating Boston society. "Tell me everything," she instructed as I took a seat across from her. I recounted my conversation with James, including Sophia's threat to involve her brother at the Globe and James's compromise proposal. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing until I finished. "So," she said finally, pouring us each a cup of tea, "James believes he can use the threat of scandal to force your hand, while appearing to compromise." "Exactly," I confirmed. "It's not without a certain cunning. He knows the trust was established partly to protect the Blackwood reputation, the very thing Sophia is now threatening." "And what are you inclined to do?" Eleanor asked, studying me over the rim of her teacup. "That depends on several factors," I replied. "Most immediately, how serious is Sophia's threat? Would her brother actually publish such a story? And if he did, how damaging would it really be to Blackwood Enterprises?" Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Good questions. Daniel Kane, her brother I presume, has a reputation for aggressive reporting, particularly when it comes to Boston's old money families. He's written several unflattering pieces about the Cabots and the Lowells. He would likely see the Blackwood story as a career-making opportunity. So the threat is credible," I mused. "The next question is whether $15 million to James is a reasonable price to prevent such exposure." "It's not just about the money," Eleanor pointed out. "It's about precedent. If you concede now under threat, what's to prevent similar demands in the future?" "Precisely my concern," I agreed. "Which brings me to a rather unorthodox idea I've been considering." Eleanor leaned forward, intrigued. "I'm listening." "What if, instead of reacting to Sophia's threat, we get ahead of it? Control the narrative rather than becoming victims of it?" "Go on," Eleanor prompted. "The damaging element of any potential story is the suggestion of family dysfunction and financial secrecy. But what if we reframe it? What if the Blackwood Foundation announced a new initiative, specifically focused on responsible corporate governance and family business succession planning?" Eleanor's eyes lit with understanding. "Using Richard's decision to appoint you as trustee as a case study in forward-thinking business succession." "Exactly," I said, warming to the idea as I articulated it. "We present it not as a lack of faith in James, but as Richard's progressive approach to modern corporate governance, bringing in diverse perspectives rather than relying solely on patriarchal succession." "That's rather brilliant," Eleanor admitted. "It neutralizes the potential scandal by normalizing the arrangement before it can be exposed as secretive or unusual. And it has the added benefit of being essentially true," I pointed out. Richard did believe in diversifying decision-making authority. He often said the old model of simply handing everything to the eldest son was outdated. Eleanor tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table. James won't like it. Making the trustee arrangement public knowledge undermines his authority in business circles. James has already undermined his own authority through his actions, I countered. This approach protects the broader Blackwood interests while limiting his ability to extract funds under duress. And Sophia's child? Eleanor asked. How does that fit into this strategy? The foundation will establish a trust for the child's education and well-being, as I've already discussed with Walter. We acknowledge the child as a Blackwood and provide appropriate support, but without the excessive funds James is demanding. Eleanor studied me with renewed appreciation. Richard chose better than he knew when he married you to my son. You think, like a Blackwood, 3 moves ahead, always focused on preserving the legacy. I learned from the best, I acknowledged. Both you and Richard. So what's our next step? Eleanor asked. All business now. I need to meet with Walter first thing tomorrow to draft the foundation announcement. Then we'll need to brief the board before James can rally opposition. And, I added with a slight grimace, I should probably speak with Sophia directly, without James's interference. Is that wise? Eleanor asked, concerned. She's hardly your ally in this situation. Perhaps not, I conceded. But she deserves to understand her options fully, not just the version James presents to her. She's carrying a Blackwood heir, after all. That makes her part of this family's future, whether any of us like it or not. Eleanor nodded slowly. You continue to surprise me, Victoria. Many women in your position would be focused solely on revenge. Revenge is satisfying but rarely productive, I replied, thinking of Richard's many business maxims. Besides, this isn't just about James's betrayal. It's about fulfilling the responsibility Richard entrusted to me, protecting the Blackwood legacy for future generations, including now Sophia's child. As we finished our tea, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. James had underestimated me from the beginning of our marriage, seeing me as an ornament, an accessory to his Blackwood identity rather than a strategic thinker in my own right. That miscalculation had finally caught up with him. There's one more thing, Eleanor said as we prepared to leave. Something I've been reluctant to mention, but which may become relevant given these developments. What is it? I asked. Richard kept a separate set of journals, more personal than his business, records. He gave them to me before he died, with instructions to share them with you only if circumstances made it necessary. She paused. I believe we've reached that point. What's in these journals? I asked, intrigued. Details of his concerns about James go beyond business judgment, Eleanor said carefully. And his reasons for trusting you with the family legacy. They're in my safe at home. I'll bring them to you tomorrow. As we parted ways outside the foundation building, the autumn sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the historic streets of Boston. I felt an odd mixture of sadness and resolve. The marriage I had believed in for 11 years was ending, but the responsibility I had accepted was just beginning to take its true shape. James thought he had gained leverage through Sophia's threats. He had no idea what was coming next. Monday. Morning arrived with a persistent autumn drizzle, the kind that seemed to wash Boston clean while painting the brick buildings in deeper shades of red. I sat at my desk in the Blackwood Restoration Group office, a stack of Richard's personal journals beside me. Eleanor had delivered them early, before James would be awake to notice the exchange. Be careful with these, she had warned, her expression unusually grave. Richard was brutally honest in his private writings. Some of what you'll read may be difficult. Now, as I opened the oldest journal, dated 5 years before Richard's death, I understood her warning. Richard's elegant handwriting filled page after page with observations about his only son that ranged from concerned to devastated. March 15th, James presented his proposal for the Atlantic City Casino development today. On the surface, the numbers look promising, but the projections rely on unrealistic occupancy rates and disregard seasonal fluctuations. When I questioned these assumptions, he became defensive, accusing me of being stuck in the past. Perhaps I am overly cautious, but caution has preserved the Blackwood fortune through depressions, recessions, and wars. I flipped forward several months. August 30th. The Atlantic City project has collapsed, just as I feared. James blames the economic downturn, the local zoning board, his project partners, everyone but himself. He doesn't see that the fundamental flaw was in the initial assessment, in his unwillingness to conduct proper due diligence before committing resources. I've covered the losses from my personal accounts to avoid impacting the company. Eleanor thinks I'm enabling him, and perhaps she's right. As I continued reading, a pattern emerged. Richard had desperately wanted to believe in his son, giving him multiple chances to prove himself with increasingly important projects. Each time, James had made the same fundamental mistakes, prioritizing flash over substance, rushing decisions, without proper research, responding to failure with blame rather than reflection. Most disturbing were Richard's observations about James's personal character. December 7th. Witnessed James lying to the board about the progress of the Chicago renovation. He presented outdated projections as current, knowing they no longer reflected reality. When I confronted him privately, he claimed it was simply positioning to maintain confidence until the new numbers could be properly contextualized. I fear my son no longer recognizes the line between strategic optimism and outright deception. Paused my reading as my assistant Anna knocked on the door. "Mr. Pierce is here for your 9:30 meeting," she announced. "Thank you, Anna. Please show him in." I quickly returned the journals to my drawer, locking it before Walter Pierce entered. The family attorney looked tired, his normally impeccable appearance slightly rumpled. "Victoria," he greeted me, setting his briefcase on my conference table. "I've been up half the night reviewing options given yesterday's developments." "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Walter," I replied, joining him at the table. "I know this situation has put you in a difficult position." Walter had served the Blackwood family for nearly 40 years, first under Richard's father, and then under Richard himself. His loyalty to the family was absolute, though I sometimes wondered if that loyalty extended equally to all family members, or primarily to the Blackwood patriarchs. "James called me late last night," Walter admitted, removing several folders from his briefcase. "He was quite insistent that I prepare documents for a modified trust disbursement of $15 million. "I'm sure he was," I said dryly. "Did he mention the circumstances surrounding this modified request?" Walter's expression tightened. "He indicated that a compromise had been reached between the two of you. I gathered there were personal matters involved." "That's one way to put it," I acknowledged. "The reality is somewhat more complicated. James's mistress is pregnant and threatening to take the story to her brother at the Boston Globe if he doesn't secure funds from the trust to support them." Walter winced. "I see. And this compromise was proposed under these circumstances?" "Exactly. Which is why I've developed an alternative approach." I outlined the plan I'd discussed with Eleanor: the Foundation's public announcement about modern governance structures, the child's trust, and the strategic reframing of Richard's decision to appoint me as controlling trustee. As I spoke, Walter's expression shifted from concern to cautious approval. "It's an unorthodox approach," he admitted when I finished, "but potentially effective in neutralizing Ms. Kane's leverage." "Can you prepare the necessary documents for the Foundation announcement and the child's trust today?" I asked. "Yes, though the child's trust will need to be structured carefully. We have limited precedent for providing for a child born outside of marriage in the Blackwood family." "There's a first time for everything," I replied. The important thing is that the child is protected while ensuring James doesn't gain direct control of significant funds. Walter nodded, making notes. And regarding James's request for $15 million? Delay, I said firmly. Site regulatory. Reviews, trust compliance protocols, whatever bureaucratic processes might reasonably require additional time. That buys you a few days at most, Walter warned. James is extremely motivated to secure these funds quickly. A few days is all I need to implement our strategy, I assured him. By the time James realizes what's happening, the narrative will already be established. After Walter left with his marching orders, I returned to Richard's journals, searching for specific entries that might prove useful in the days ahead. Around noon, my phone rang, a call from a number I didn't recognize. Victoria Blackwood, I answered. Mrs. Blackwood, this is Sophia Kane. Her voice sounded strained, lacking the confidence she'd projected at yesterday's gathering. I sat up straighter. Ms. Kane, I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I imagine not. A bitter laugh. But we need to talk, and I'd rather not have that conversation with James present. That seems reasonable, I agreed cautiously. What did you have in mind? Could we meet somewhere? Today, if possible? I considered the risks and benefits of such a meeting. On one hand, Sophia was clearly adversarial and possibly unstable given the circumstances. On the other, understanding her position directly might provide valuable insight and potentially an opportunity to resolve this situation more efficiently. I could meet you at 3 o'clock, I offered. There's a private room at the Gardner Museum Cafe that would afford us some privacy. The museum? She sounded surprised. Not a lawyer's office or something equally intimidating? I find art creates a better atmosphere for difficult conversations than legal offices, I replied. But if you'd prefer somewhere else, no, she cut in. The museum is fine. 3 o'clock. After hanging up, I immediately called Eleanor to update her on this development. She's reaching out to you directly? Eleanor sounded concerned. Without James's knowledge, I presume. That's my assumption, I confirmed. She specifically mentioned wanting to talk without him present. Be careful, Victoria. This could be a trap. Perhaps she's planning to record your conversation to use against you later. That occurred to me, I admitted. I'll be cautious about what I say. Perhaps you should bring counsel, Eleanor suggested. No, I decided. That would immediately put her on the defensive. I need her to feel she can speak freely if I'm going to understand what she really wants. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was one of my favorite places in Boston. A Venetian-style palazzo built by one of the city's most eccentric and forward-thinking socialites. Isabella, like Richard, had been determined to protect her legacy, creating a trust with highly specific conditions for her art collection. I found it fitting to meet Sophia in a place created by a woman who had so carefully controlled the terms of her own legacy. I arrived early, securing the private alcove, in the cafe and ordering tea for two. At precisely 3 o'clock, Sophia appeared, looking markedly different from the confident woman who had announced her pregnancy the day before. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal, her clothing, a loose sweater, and jeans, far more casual than the polished dresses I'd seen her wear previously. Thank you for meeting me, she said stiffly, sliding into the chair across from me. Of course, I replied, pouring her a cup of tea. I imagine you have questions. Sophia studied me, her expression guarded. James called me last night. He said you'd agreed to a compromise. $15 million from the trust in exchange for my discretion. James often hears what he wants to hear, I said carefully. We discussed a potential compromise. I made no commitments. Her jaw tightened. So you're not approving the money? I didn't say that. I took a sip of tea. What I'm trying to understand is what you want, Ms. Kane, not what James has promised you or what he thinks you want. What do you actually hope to achieve in this situation? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She began, then stopped. What kind of question is that? I'm pregnant with a Blackwood heir. I want what any mother would want. Security for my child. Security can take many forms, I observed. Financial support is one, but there's also family connection, social standing, and educational opportunity. Which aspects matter most to you? Sophia's eyes narrowed. Are you trying to negotiate me down? Figure out the minimum payment that will make me go away quietly? I'm trying to have an honest conversation, I corrected. Something that's been in short supply over the past few days. This seemed to strike a chord. Sophia's defensive posture softened slightly. James told me he was worth over $400 million, she said after a moment. He said once we were together officially, money would never be a concern. He talked about houses in multiple countries, private schools, trust funds. He painted this picture of our future. And now you've discovered that picture was largely fictional, I finished for her. At least in terms of his ability to deliver it independently. He lied to me. Her voice cracked slightly. About everything, it seems. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the younger woman. Whatever her original intentions in pursuing James, she now found herself pregnant and entangled in a family drama far more complicated than she had anticipated. Not everything, I said gently. The Blackwood family does have significant resources. Your child will be a Blackwood, regardless of the circumstances of conception. That comes with certain realities. Like what? She asked, a flicker of hope crossing her face. Like the trust I've already instructed Walter Pierce to establish for your child's education and health care. Like the family connection, which, while unquestionably complicated, won't be denied. Eleanor Blackwood may not approve of how this situation developed, but she takes family obligations seriously. Your child will be her grandchild. Sophia stared at me. You've already set up a trust for my baby? Why would you do that? Because whatever has happened between you, James, and me, the child is innocent, I replied simply. And because it's what Richard would have expected of me as trustee of the Blackwood fortune. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, surprising both of us. She blinked them back quickly. I didn't expect kindness from you. I'm not being kind, I clarified. I'm being practical. This child will be a Blackwood. How we handle this situation now will affect their future, along with the future of the family as a whole. Sophia reached for her tea, using the moment to compose herself. So what exactly are you proposing? First, I'd like to hear what you truly want, I repeated. Not James's vision, but yours. She considered this, seeming to really think about it perhaps for the first time. I want financial security for my child, she said slowly. Good education, health care, opportunities. I want recognition, I suppose, not to be hidden away as the family's embarrassing secret. She paused. And professionally, I don't want this situation to destroy my career. I've worked hard to get where I am. I nodded, appreciating her honesty. Those are reasonable priorities. Here's what I can offer. The child's trust will provide generously for education through graduate school if desired, comprehensive health care, and a modest living stipend upon reaching adulthood. The Blackwood Foundation will acknowledge your child as a family member. As for your career, I can help ensure you're not professionally damaged by this situation, perhaps even creating opportunities through foundation connections. And what do you expect in return? Sophia asked cautiously. Discretion, I replied honestly. Not permanent silence, but coordination. Before you or your brother publish anything about the Blackwood family governance structure, you discuss it. With me first. That's it? She seemed skeptical. No demands that I leave Boston? No non-disclosure agreement about James? Your relationship with James is between the two of you, I said. Though I would suggest you consider carefully whether he's truly the partner you want moving forward, given how readily he's misrepresented fundamental aspects of his life. Sophia looked down at her tea. He keeps insisting that once he gets the money, everything will work out. That we just need to present a united front against you. And do you believe him? I asked gently. I did yesterday, she admitted. Now. I don't know what to believe. I reached into my bag and retrieved a copy of one of Richard's journal entries, one I'd selected specifically for this meeting. I slid it across the table. What's this? Sophia asked. Something Richard Blackwood wrote about James 3 years ago. I think it might help clarify the situation you're in. She read the entry slowly, her expression darkening. April 3rd. James has demonstrated again today that he will sacrifice long-term stability for short-term advantage. When presented with two investment options, one offering moderate but reliable returns over decades, the other promising dramatic gains but with significant risk, he chose the latter without hesitation. When I questioned whether this aligned with our family's multi-generational perspective, he replied, "The future can take care of itself." This fundamental philosophical difference is what concerns me most about entrusting him with the family legacy. There are dozens more entries like this, I told her when she finished reading. It's why Richard created the trustee arrangement, to protect the family resources from James's tendency to prioritize immediate gratification over long-term security. Why? Are you showing me this? Sophia asked, pushing the paper back toward me. Because you're making decisions now that will affect your child's future, I replied. And you deserve to make those decisions with clear information about the man promising to secure that future. Sophia was silent for a long moment, absently placing a protective hand over her still flat stomach. The trust you've established for the baby, she finally said. How generous is generous? Enough to ensure your child never has to worry about educational opportunities or health care, from birth through adulthood, I answered. Not enough to enable a life of idle luxury without purpose. Richard believed strongly that excessive wealth without responsibility damages character development. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. So my child gets the Blackwood name and security, but not enough money to become like James. Precisely, I confirmed, somewhat surprised by her insight. And what about the $15 million James keeps promising me? Is that real? It could be, I acknowledged, but it wouldn't go directly to you or even to James. It would need to be tied to a legitimate business venture with proper oversight and governance, not a blank check. Sophia nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I need time to process all this, to figure out what I really want, independent of James's promises. That's reasonable, I agreed. Take a few days. But please, before you make any decisions about speaking to your brother or anyone else about the Blackwood family situation, call me first. I will, she promised. As she rose to leave, Sophia hesitated. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask, I replied cautiously. Do you still love him, after everything? The question caught me off guard with its directness. I considered deflecting but decided honesty might serve better here. I loved the man I thought he was, I answered carefully. The person I've discovered, over the past few days, perhaps he was always there beneath the surface, and I simply didn't want to see it. Sophia nodded, a flash of understanding passing between us. Two women who had both been deceived by the same man in different ways. Thank you for meeting with me, she said. It wasn't what I expected. After she left, I remained at the table, finishing my tea and reflecting on our conversation. Sophia was smarter and more perceptive than I had initially given her credit for. Whether that made her more or less dangerous remained to be seen. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. James looking for you. Called the office, the house. Seems agitated. I was not surprised. By now, James would have spoken with Walter and realized that his compromise wasn't proceeding as smoothly as he'd anticipated. He would also, no doubt, be wondering about Sophia's whereabouts. I texted back, "Heading to the foundation office. Now. Meet me there in 30 minutes?" Gathering my things, I left the museum, the autumn air feeling somehow cleaner and clearer than before. The path forward was taking shape, though significant challenges remained. James wouldn't surrender easily, especially once he realized Sophia and I had spoken directly. But for the first time since this crisis began, I felt confident that I could fulfill Richard's trust in me, protecting the Blackwood legacy while ensuring fair treatment for all involved, even those who didn't yet know they needed protection from themselves. The Blackwood Foundation offices were quiet as I arrived, most of the staff having gone home for the day. Eleanor was already waiting in the conference room, a stack of folders neatly arranged before her. "You look remarkably composed for someone in the middle of a family crisis," she observed as I set down my bag. "Years of boarding school taught me to never let them see you sweat," I replied with a faint smile. "How agitated is James exactly?" "Quite," Eleanor confirmed. "He called me after failing to reach you, demanded to know if I'd seen you, if I knew what you were planning. He seems to think you're deliberately undermining some agreement the two of you reached." "Hardly an agreement," I said, taking a seat across from her. "More like an ultimatum he presented that I never accepted." "And your meeting with Sophia? How did that go?" I recounted my conversation with James's mistress, including her apparent willingness to consider options independent of James's guidance. "Interesting," Eleanor mused when I finished. "She's more pragmatic than I would have expected." "She's in a vulnerable position," I pointed out. "Pregnant, professionally compromised, and now discovering that her path to financial security isn't as straightforward as James led her to believe. Pragmatism is her best option. Do you trust her?" I considered the question carefully. "Not entirely, but I think she's genuinely reassessing her situation in light of new information, and that creates an opportunity." Eleanor nodded toward the folders she'd brought. "I've been doing some research while you were with Sophia. There's something about this Singapore development project that didn't sit right with me." "What did you find?" She opened the top folder, revealing printouts of corporate registrations and property records. The Meridian Group, the supposed partner in this venture, was only incorporated 6 months ago. Their listed assets are minimal, yet somehow they've secured rights to prime development property worth millions. I leaned forward, examining the documents. "Shell Company?" "Almost certainly," Eleanor confirmed. "And here's where it gets interesting." She flipped to another page. "One of the principals is listed as Marcus Vaughn. That name mean anything to you?" I frowned, trying to place it. "It sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't." "James's roommate from Harvard," Eleanor supplied. "They've maintained connections over the years, though they're not publicly close. Marcus has been involved in several questionable development projects across Southeast Asia, 2 of which collapsed amid allegations of bribery and permit irregularities." The implications were immediately clear. So this Singapore project could be more than just a risky investment. It could be something potentially illegal, or at minimum, ethically dubious, Eleanor agreed, which explains James's desperation to access the funds quickly and without the usual oversight. "Have you shared this with Walter?" "Not yet. I wanted to confirm my suspicions with you first." I sat back, processing this new information. If the Singapore project involved illegal activities, James's exposure went beyond mere financial risk or marital infidelity. This could potentially have criminal implications. "Did Richard know about James's connection to Marcus Vaughn?" I asked. Eleanor's expression darkened. "Richard had concerns. There's an entry in his journals about a vacation property deal in Thailand that James wanted to invest in, one of Marcus's projects. Richard vetoed it after his investigators uncovered some troubling irregularities in the permitting process. We need more information, I decided. Richard maintained relationships with several private investigation firms. Are any still on retainer? Garrison Securities, Eleanor confirmed. They've worked with the family for decades. Very discreet, very thorough. Contact them tomorrow, I instructed. We need everything they can find on the Meridian Group, Marcus, Vaughn, and this Singapore project. If there's something illegal happening, we need to know before James involves the Blackwood name any further. Our planning was interrupted by my phone ringing, James's ringtone. I glanced at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. Hello, James, I answered, keeping my voice neutral. Where the hell have you been? He demanded without preamble. I've been trying to reach you all day. Working, I replied simply. Is something wrong? Is something... He broke off with a frustrated sound. Yes, something is wrong. I spoke with Walter. He's giving me some nonsense about regulatory reviews delaying the trust disbursement we discussed. Walter is being appropriately thorough, I said. Major trust disbursements require proper documentation and review. We don't have time for bureaucratic delays, James snapped. I need those funds within the week, Victoria. Meridian has other potential investors circling. I understand your urgency, I said carefully, but proper governance can't be rushed, especially with amounts of this magnitude. This is deliberate obstruction, he accused. You never intended to approve the compromise. James, I kept my voice level. I agreed to consider your proposal. That means conducting due diligence on the investment opportunity, reviewing trust, compliance requirements, and ensuring proper protections are in place. Standard procedure for any significant transaction. There was a pause, and I could almost see him struggling to control his temper. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. Where were you this afternoon? The question confirmed my suspicion that he had already spoken with Sophia. I had several meetings, I replied truthfully, if incompletely. With Sophia? The accusation was clear in his tone. Yes, among others, I acknowledged, seeing no benefit in denial. She reached out to me. I thought it would be helpful to understand her perspective directly. You had no right to speak with her without me present, James hissed. Whatever game you're playing, Victoria, this isn't a game, I interrupted firmly. This is about addressing a complex situation that affects multiple lives, including your unborn child's. If you're concerned about what Sophia and I discussed, perhaps you should ask her. I have, he retorted. She's suddenly thinking things over. What exactly did you say to her? The truth, I replied simply. Something that's been in short supply lately. Eleanor's eyebrows raised slightly at my directness, but she nodded approval. The Foundation Board meets tomorrow at noon, I continued before James could respond. I'd like you to attend. We'll be discussing several important matters, including a new governance initiative I think you'll find relevant. What governance? Initiative? Suspicion colored his voice. All will be explained at the meeting, I said. Noon, James. Don't be late. After ending the call, I turned to Eleanor. He's already spoken with Sophia. She's apparently reconsidering their arrangement. Good, Eleanor said decisively. The more distance between them, the better chance we have of resolving this situation cleanly. He's still pushing for the money, I noted. Mentioned other investors circling the Singapore project. Pressuring you with artificial time constraints, Eleanor scoffed. Classic manipulation tactic. Except now we know there may be legitimate reasons he's in a hurry, I pointed out. If Marcus Vaughn is involved, there could be deadlines related to permit approvals or other regulatory windows. All the more reason to proceed with caution, Eleanor countered. If there's something illicit about this project, the last thing we want is Blackwood money anywhere near it. We spent the next 2 hours finalizing plans for the Foundation Board meeting, drafting the announcement about the trust governance structure and preparing responses to likely objections. By the time we finished, night had fallen over Boston, the foundation's windows reflecting our determined expressions back at us against the darkened glass. "You should stay at my place tonight," Eleanor suggested as we gathered our materials. "I don't think it's wise for you to return to the house with James in his current state." I hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of being driven from my own home by James's anger. "I appreciate the offer, but I need to maintain normalcy as much as possible right now. Besides, I doubt James will be there. He'll be with Sophia, trying to undo whatever progress we made today." Eleanor didn't look convinced. "At least let me send a car for you in the morning. No sense taking unnecessary risks." I agreed to this compromise, though I privately thought Eleanor was being overly cautious. James might be many things, but physically threatening wasn't one of them, or so I believed. When I arrived home, the house was dark except for a single light burning in James's study. I quietly made my way upstairs, hoping to avoid a confrontation until morning when we would both be fresher. But as I passed his door, his voice called out, "Running away, Victoria? That's not like you." I paused, then turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, a glass of scotch in his hand. His normally impeccable appearance was distinctly rumpled, tie loosened, shirt partially untucked, hair disheveled as though he'd been repeatedly running his hands through it. "It's been a long day," I replied evenly. "We can talk tomorrow." "Let's talk now," he insisted, gesturing toward his study. "Since you've been so busy arranging my future behind my back." I weighed my options. Refusing would only escalate his anger and suspicion, while a brief conversation might give me insight into his current thinking. 15 minutes, I conceded, entering his study. "Then I'm going to bed." James's study had once been a precise reflection of his carefully cultivated image. Tasteful modernist furniture against traditional architecture, expensive art selected for its investment potential rather than aesthetic appeal, business awards prominently displayed. Tonight it was in uncharacteristic disarray. Papers were scattered across the desk, several books had been pulled from shelves, and 2 empty Scotch glasses suggested this wasn't his first drink of the evening. "You met with Sophia," he said without preamble, shutting the door behind me. "Yes," I confirmed, choosing to remain standing rather than sit. "She reached out to me, and now she's suddenly questioning our plans," he continued, pacing toward his desk, "asking about trust provisions and governance structures, terms she never used before today. Perhaps she's becoming better informed about her situation," I suggested mildly. James slammed his glass down, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. "You're trying to turn her against me." "I simply presented her with facts, James. If those facts make her question your arrangement, that's hardly my fault." His eyes narrowed. "What exactly did you tell her?" "That her child will be provided for through a dedicated trust. That the Blackwood family will acknowledge their connection to the baby. That her professional standing won't be damaged by this situation." I paused. "All things I would have told you directly if you'd been interested in an honest conversation, rather than manipulation and threats." "Manipulation?" He laughed bitterly. "That's rich coming from you. Did you tell her how you've been secretly controlling? My inheritance for years? How did my own father conspire with my wife to keep me from what's rightfully mine?" "Richard didn't conspire with anyone," I corrected firmly. "He made a difficult decision to protect the family legacy when he became concerned about your judgment. A concern, I might add, that seems increasingly justified given recent events." James moved closer, his expression darkening. "And this foundation, announcement tomorrow. What exactly are you planning?" "A governance initiative," I replied carefully, "formalizing the structures Richard put in place. Publicly announcing that my wife controls my family's money," he translated, voice rising. "Humiliating me in front of Boston's entire business community. Framing a progressive governance approach in positive terms, I countered, presenting Richard's decision as forward-thinking rather than letting it emerge as scandalous gossip through Sophia's brother. He stared at me, realizing dawning. You're controlling the narrative, getting ahead of any story Sophia might take to the press. It's the sensible approach, I acknowledged. For everyone involved, including you. Including me? He laughed, harshly. How exactly does publicly undermining my authority benefit me? By presenting the trust structure as a deliberate modernization strategy, rather than a vote of no confidence in your judgment, I explained patiently. By creating a framework that allows you to remain the public face of Blackwood Enterprises while ensuring proper oversight of major decisions. So I get to be the puppet CEO, he spat. The figurehead with no real power. You get to be the leader who embraces modern governance principles, I corrected. The visionary who continues his father's progressive approach to family business management. For a moment, I thought James might actually be considering this perspective. His expression shifted, the anger giving way to something more calculating. And what about the Singapore project? The 15 million? That depends on due diligence, I said carefully. If the investment opportunity is legitimate and the proper oversight mechanisms are in place, I'm open to considering it. And if I told you the window for investment closes at the end of the week, he pressed, that without immediate commitment, the opportunity is lost? Then I'd question why any legitimate business opportunity would operate on such arbitrary deadlines. I replied honestly, and I'd be even more determined to conduct thorough due diligence before committing Blackwood resources. His face hardened again. Due diligence, governance, oversight. You sound exactly like my father. I'll take that as a compliment, I said, quietly. Richard built something remarkable. I'm simply trying to honor his wishes in preserving it. James turned away, moving to the window that overlooked our garden. For a long moment, he was silent, staring out at the darkness. Do you know what it's like? He finally said, his voice strangely hollow. To discover that your father trusted your wife more than he trusted you? That he believed you so fundamentally incompetent he had to put safeguards in place against your very nature? The vulnerability in his question caught me off guard. Despite everything, I felt a flash of sympathy for the man I had once loved. Richard didn't think you were incompetent, James, I said gently. He thought you were impulsive. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing, he muttered. Either way, he didn't trust me with my own birthright. I moved closer, though, still maintaining a careful distance. He wanted to give you time to grow into the responsibility. The trust arrangement wasn't meant to be permanent, only until you demonstrated the judgment needed to manage the family resources wisely. James turned back to me, his expression unreadable. And who decides when I've demonstrated that judgment? You? The trust document outlines specific criteria, I explained. Consistent decision-making that prioritizes long-term stability over short-term gains, transparent financial management, adherence to the ethical standards the Blackwood name has always represented, standards I've apparently failed to meet for our entire marriage, he observed bitterly. I didn't respond to this, knowing anything I said would only deepen his resentment. My 15 minutes are up, I said instead, moving toward the door. We can continue this discussion tomorrow after the foundation meeting. Victoria, he called as I reached the doorway. I paused, looking back at him. For a brief moment, the hardness in his expression softened, revealing a glimpse of uncertainty beneath the anger and entitlement. Was any of it real? Us? The question, so unexpected, so raw, momentarily disarmed me. I believed it was, I answered truthfully. For a long time. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I found myself unexpectedly shaken by our exchange. Beneath James's anger and manipulation, I'd glimpsed something I hadn't anticipated. genuine pain at his father's lack of trust. It didn't excuse his actions, but it did perhaps explain some of his desperate need to prove himself, to secure what he saw as his rightful place. I checked my phone to find messages from Eleanor, Walter, and surprisingly, Sophia. Eleanor confirmed our morning meeting before the foundation board gathering. Walter reported that the child's trust documents were prepared and awaiting final review, and Sophia's message was brief but significant. I've been thinking about our conversation. Can we meet again tomorrow? There's more I need to tell you. As I prepared for bed, I mentally reviewed our strategy, looking for vulnerabilities or oversights. James was predictably angry about the foundation announcement, but his reaction to the trust arrangement for Sophia's child had been harder to gauge. Was he genuinely concerned about the baby's welfare, or simply worried about losing control of Sophia now that she was exploring options independent of his promises? And what about Sophia herself? Her message suggested she had information she hadn't shared during our museum meeting. Was it something that could help our position or a new complication to navigate? Sleep came fitfully that night. My dreams filled with fragments of Richard's journals, Sophia's uncertain expression as she absorbed the truth about James, and the flicker of vulnerability I'd glimpsed in my husband's eyes when he asked if our marriage had ever been real. Morning would bring the foundation board meeting and the public unveiling of our strategy. James would be there, no doubt prepared to challenge the narrative we'd constructed. Sophia's additional information might strengthen our position or undermine it completely. The game was entering its most critical phase, and I needed to be prepared for whatever counter-moves James might have planned. 6 months had passed since that fateful Sunday when Sophia Kane had announced her pregnancy at our family gathering. Boston's winter had come and gone, and spring was bringing new life to the public garden visible from my office window at the Blackwood Foundation headquarters. The foundation board meeting had proceeded almost exactly as planned that day. I presented the governance initiative, framing Richard's decision to appoint me as controlling trustee as a forward-thinking approach to modern corporate stewardship. Most board members had received it positively, particularly after Eleanor's enthusiastic endorsement. James had attended, as requested, his face a careful mask of neutrality. He'd said little during the presentation, though his eyes had never left my face as I spoke about preserving the Blackwood legacy for future generations, including, I noted pointedly, all future Blackwood children. The Singapore project had collapsed spectacularly 2 weeks later, when Singaporean authorities announced an investigation into permit irregularities. Marcus Vaughan had disappeared overnight, leaving his investors, thankfully not including the Blackwood Trust, holding worthless development rights. James had been furious, of course, convinced I'd somehow engineered the investigation. The truth was much simpler. Sophia had provided the crucial information during our second meeting. Having grown suspicious of James's evasiveness about the project, she'd conducted her own research, discovering connections to previous failed ventures with similar irregularities. I may have been naive about many things, she'd told me as she handed over the documents, but I'm still a marketing executive who knows how to research a company thoroughly. Her information, combined with what Garrison Securities uncovered, had provided enough evidence to quietly alert the appropriate authorities through anonymous channels. The Blackwood name had remained untainted by association. My office door opened, interrupting my reflections. Walter Pierce entered, carrying the finalized divorce papers. "Everything's in order," he confirmed, placing the documents on my desk. "James has signed all the required forms. Once you sign, we can file immediately." I nodded, reaching for my pen. The terms were exactly as we'd negotiated. Fair, but with significant protections for the Blackwood family interests. James would retain his position as CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, but with enhanced oversight from an expanded board of directors. He would receive a generous stipend from the trust, but no direct access to principal without approval from the trustee committee that now included Eleanor, Walter, and me. "And the child's trust?" I asked, signing where indicated. Fully established and funded, Walter confirmed. Young Thomas Richard Blackwood will want for nothing in terms of education, health care, or opportunities. I smiled at the name. Sophia had surprised everyone by naming her son. Born healthy at 7 pounds, 3 ounces just 3 weeks ago, after his grandfather. It was a gesture that had touched Eleanor deeply and had even seemed to affect James, who had maintained a careful distance throughout Sophia's pregnancy, but had visited the hospital briefly after the birth. "Will you be attending the naming ceremony next Sunday?" Walter asked as he collected the signed papers. "Yes," I confirmed. "Eleanor and I both received invitations." "James as well?" Walter raised an eyebrow. "I believe so," I replied, though whether he'll attend is another matter entirely. After Walter left, I moved to the window, looking out at the city spread before me. So much had changed in 6 months. My marriage was officially ending. James and I maintained a civil professional relationship, but nothing more. He had recently begun seeing someone new, a yacht club socialite who presumably knew exactly what she was getting into with a Blackwood heir whose financial decisions required trustee approval. Sophia had surprised me most of all. Free from James's influence, she had revealed herself to be intelligent, pragmatic, and remarkably grounded. She had accepted a position with the Blackwood Foundation's marketing department, my suggestion approved unanimously by the board, and was excelling at developing campaigns for our community initiatives. Eleanor had taken to her role as grandmother, with unexpected enthusiasm, visiting Sophia and little Thomas weekly, bringing family heirlooms and sharing Blackwood history that would one day belong to him. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Car waiting downstairs. Don't be late for the board meeting." I gathered my materials, including the presentation for the new historic preservation initiative I was championing, a partnership between the Blackwood Foundation and my own Blackwood Restoration Group. The IFE project would restore historically significant buildings in underserved Boston neighborhoods, creating community spaces while preserving architectural heritage. It was exactly the kind of long-term, community-focused investment Richard had always valued. As I rode the elevator down, I reflected on Richard's final journal entry, written just days before his death. "I worry I've placed too heavy a burden on Victoria's shoulders." The responsibility of the Blackwood legacy is immense, particularly when balanced against her own ambitions and the complications of her marriage to James. Yet watching her these past months, I've seen a strength and clarity of purpose that reassures me. She understands what I've always believed, that wealth without responsibility is a curse, not a blessing. That a legacy is measured not by its monetary value, but by its positive impact across generations. If James someday grows into the man I've hoped he could become, he'll recognize the gift I've given him in a wife whose judgment exceeds his own. If not, at least the Blackwood legacy will be preserved for whatever future heirs may come. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Through the glass doors, I could see the Foundation's car waiting, Eleanor already inside reviewing documents, with her usual efficiency. Beyond, Boston's spring sunshine illuminated the city Richard had loved and served throughout his life. I stepped forward into the light, ready for whatever came next. The Blackwood legacy continued, though not in the way any of us had imagined on that autumn Sunday when a pregnancy announcement had revealed the truth about power, control, and the responsibilities that come with both. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.